All right, let's go ahead and get underway. Thank you for your patience as I had to move myself and my young dog from one office to another before getting started here today. And hopefully said young dog won't disturb us. Let's go ahead and just check in on how people are doing. Here, we're very excited because we actually get fall break this year and we're going on it next week, so yay. And I have a few more meetings on Zoom, but then we get a couple days off, which is very cool. Carlos, let's go to you next.
We just finished fall break.
Nice.
Although it didn't feel like fall break. What happened, Carly? People didn't have classes Monday and Tuesday. And then yeah, catching up. We do 8-week modules and our class starts today. But it's metagenomics, so I'm happy. That's my update.
Your class starts on Friday?
Oh, yes, without an actual meeting, which makes no sense. So I just send emails into the void. But I have fun.
All righty. Well, let's go to Rachel next.
Hi, folks. I'm Rachel. I'm American Society for Microbiology. Doing pretty well. Was a little under the weather earlier this week, but fortunately, all the family is negative COVID and ready to move on.
Very good. Welcome. Let's do Dominique next.
Hi, I'm Dominique Germinio. I work at Cuca College, and we have break for next week for 2 days.
Nice. Yeah, that's what we got. Cindy.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm Cindy. I'm from UHeart. We don't have a designated fall break, but we do get Thanksgiving and we get the entire week off, and I am looking forward to it.
Yeah, we had that last year and I really liked it, the whole 1 week of Thanksgiving thing.
I cannot wait. I'm so tired already.
Carly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carly Shogren. Carlos is my work mentor. But not my POM mentor. I have another POM mentor. So we're just coming off of fall break, which has been really nice. That meant I didn't have to teach one of my classes this week, but I had to teach another. And it gave me a little bit of time to get in the lab and extract RNA, which feels like a huge success because I haven't been able to manage to get time to do that. So that feels like a victory.
Cool. Tara.
Hi. Yeah, I'm kind of getting over a cold too, and I'm also in the process of moving. But I'm also like a postdoc right now, so I'm more focused on research right now. So it's actually kind of cool. I've been like collaborating with someone else in the lab, so it's been fun to like kind of analyze someone else's data. So it's been like more fun to just like collaborate and work with other people lately.
Nice. And then last but not least, we have Kelsey.
Hey, everybody. I am in Minnesota. I'm at University of Minnesota, Rochester. I'm a biology faculty member, and we don't have fall break until the week of Thanksgiving, just Thursday and Friday. So I'm totally jelly. I'm totally jelly.
That's the most brutal of all of them then.
Yeah, I'm running away on the weekends to go camping, so I'm communing with nature, and it's been weird and warm, but I think we're gonna get smacked upside the head with some fall here pretty soon.
Wonderful. So I am glad that Carlos is here because he is responsible for this paper, not its composition, but the fact that we are doing it. It's a really cool paper to talk about. I mean, it's more of it's an essay as opposed to a research paper, but it talks about DEI stuff in a way that I would say, don't normally talk about it, and that is a concentration on ableism as opposed to racism or other varieties of potential barriers to getting an effective science education. And so all of us as educators are asked to think about all of these questions on a regular basis. And I freely admit I have not had to Well, maybe that's not the right way to put it. I've not had to think about it. And is that because I haven't had a need to, or because I didn't know I needed to, right? And so I looked at this beginning and I looked at the suggestions being provided of here's how you would have the students introduce themselves. I'm still at a little bit more conservative institution. We still don't do a lot of the my pronouns are, and I imagine we will sooner rather than later. And then the discussion of what your needs might be, your accessibility needs. And I was trying to picture doing this with my students. And one thing that struck me very much in this essay was the idea of needing to build your students up to not only being comfortable with this, but expecting this, right? That you would have these sort of discussions right in the beginning of a class of these are the type of things you would need. Whether students would be comfortable doing this in front of other students, I suppose, would be another question. But it was a provocative way to start, just to make me think about that, right? That one would do this as a standard part of the beginning of their course. Let's go right to here, because this is sort of the meat and potatoes of this paper, sort of the ideas of disability justice and the type of things one would think about in terms of potential barriers to education based on some form of disability. And I looked at this, and some of the first things I was struck of was trying to talk to students about anti-capitalist politics, which I was like, I could see that going over very poorly with some segments of my population, but nevertheless, I do understand what they're trying to get at there, right? Carlos, let me pick on you first in terms of your inspiration behind bringing this to us to discuss, and maybe what on here you may have seen at a much larger and more diverse institution than mine, things to think about in terms of these issues.
So I cheated because as part of the happy hour Friday Falcon talks from the Institute for Scientific Teaching, one of the authors, actually, I believe both of Daniel presented there and presented on this essay, Daniel Reinholz, and Samantha was there. And it was really inspiring. He is transparent about his access needs. He brings people into his lab and mentors them who have different access needs. And he really modeled it in the workshop or in the talk. And his message was, let's normalize this, which I still struggle with. And I still struggle with good ways of introducing each other in class and starting that first day. And now pronouns are something we do. And in his essay, it's kind of a call to action of let's start normalizing this. And here are some really specific reasons why. So I like that they always have specific reasons. The background was interesting too. How there was a sentence I highlighted that some active learning can actually be harmful, and we can start to segregate or bias even populations with disabilities by really giving access to the ones that are more vocal about it or more outspoken. So that was the inspiration behind this. And table 1 is really the social justice side of disability, which I don't touch enough and should.
I appreciate that.
Was that what?
Yes, that was perfect. It's like appreciating the setup, and you should not feel bad about stealing. I have made a career off of it in different ways or another. We're blending ideas together. How does that sound? And just the idea of awareness of this. And it's one thing to think about ideas of disability when it comes to work in the laboratory. Like, I think there are some self-evident, mechanical things to think about. And this essay does in fact bring that up. Because we are very much an active learning focused group, I would like to think about those particular ideas in particular in this discussion. The idea of active learning ideas that we have spent in this group a long time promoting, being actually detrimental to a segment of the population. And so it could be important, or would be important, to figure out, number one, why, and number two, can we be aware of what students need accommodation? And that's what that first introductory, literally introduction to my students at the beginning of this paper is trying to get at, sort of public identification of what my access needs are. I can think of the smallest of things, like, doing small group discussion, leaving students in different, not unsupervised, but minimally supervised groups to have discussions with each other, and how certain levels of disability could compromise one's ability to actually participate and maybe even be intimidated, right, with being in that sort of peer-to-peer level of discussion. So I think that's a good next question for the group, would be looking at these particular principles of justice and some of the other ideas in this paper. What struck you as sort of the most important things in relation to your own educational experiences, or maybe your own past or present teaching experiences?
I'll share a little bit.
Please.
There are some really great aspects of this paper where, I would be reading it and it would send some signal to my brain, like, oh yeah, like this practice we do. And then later on in the paper, it would call it out directly.
Exactly.
And just kind of looking for the opportunities in science material to be able to talk about different types of justice and dismantling certain isms when science often feels so abstract and far away from societal movements like this. But thinking about in genetics, the way we use words like a normal gene versus a bad copy. It's not a bad copy, it's just a variation. Figuring out how we can reword things to help really pull into these concepts. One of the things that I thought about when I was looking at that table with the anti-capitalism stuff, I immediately started thinking about my intro to bio teaching when we touch on ecology and community dynamics, and competition is what we teach when everyone loses. That is a lose-lose situation because everyone suffers, and that ecology dynamic versus mutualism or parasitism. So finding opportunities to really look at the biology and go, where can we embrace diversity and uphold some of these principles, even indirectly? And then with active learning, I think I'm constantly being challenged to be more flexible, especially with changes in the last year in education. It's just constantly learning new things and trying to push myself to keep that up. With a lot of breakout rooms, and that's completely unsupervised. There's no bird's ear view of what's going on with students. I can get really nervous about what's going on and what group dynamics are happening and how could I squash some interpersonal problems if I was just there and I could eavesdrop a little. But I do like to practice sharing with students ahead of time, that if for any reason they feel uncomfortable or unsafe, they should leave the breakout room at any point. And reminding them that they always have the option to leave any kind of communication where it's not working for them. And trying to engineer more opportunities like that remind students they have the autonomy to leave a situation that's not safe for them.
And that they're not going to be penalized for whatever reason.
Yeah. And prioritizing that, right? Because we want our students to learn, not to be harmed. And I think sometimes we forget sort of the structural norms and the viewpoint of a student, where they really want to follow directions and they don't want to lose out on opportunities and points. And like, just a simple reminder that like, hey, we just want you to learn. If you're not learning, we want to figure out another way around. That's a challenge for us to try and do better, but also a reminder for them that they have control over that too. There is a lot in here about active learning with the small group work and required participation and assessments. And I was wondering if anyone else had like any suggestions in those categories or other things that you do that kind of help integrate more flexibility. I imagine everyone here is super proactive learning, and it's really hard to think that some of these practices could be damaging.
There's one thing to be, I think, proactive learning, and it's another thing to like make sure you're implementing it in a way that is in fact sensible. I definitely share your view of like things that you hadn't thought about potentially being potentially bad for a segment of the population. A specific example I could think of, we've had a notable uptick in students presenting some kind of significant level of autism, and having those students in small groups sometimes can be for them a big challenge. And so the idea of giving people the opportunity, I like what you say, there was safety, right? Like it's a safe space and you can leave. That's a really good thing up front. Those ground rules would be super important. Kelsey, how about you?
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that, Carly. I think a lot about control you mentioned. And I think a lot of the flexibility we give students and a lot of the things that I'm trying to do is to make students aware of the power they have, because a lot of this stems from a power imbalance. I think a lot of active learning is we're moving away from the instructor focus and trying to be more student centered. And so all of this feeds into that. I think a lot of us have kept a lot of the flexibility, maybe like dropping the too low scores for low stake assignments, or having a whole day during which students can take an exam rather than this just a very specific time period, like all sorts of flexibility that we adopted over the past couple of years. We've said, hey, why not keep that all the time for everybody? The one thing I was going to suggest about participation is something called a warm call. And this has come up before in other Palm conversations. I've actually got a paper out right now that's describing this. It's in review. So, but the idea is that cold calling, according to the literature, is only ever bad. It only produces negative feelings in students, even if they're majority prepared, able to handle it. It doesn't feel good to them, and it doesn't really work for learning. But we want student voices in the classroom, and we want to call on everybody. So we outline this idea of letting students know that you'd like to call on them and giving them the opportunity to opt out. So I will have my students be working on something in their small groups, and you can do this online or in person, and you just say, hey, can I call in your group for when we get to discussing part A in a large group? And then they can say, please don't. And if they're cool, if you're like, you guys have the right answer, this looks really great, I love how you drew this diagram, I love how you explained this key point, would you mind sharing it? And so that's worked really well. I find that you have to have rapport with students. I don't introduce this right away. I just started doing it in the 4th week this semester. I would tell them ahead of time, like, this is where I want to start bringing your voices in. So I'm going to start calling on people more and more, but I'm going to give you a heads up. And since we're in the classroom this semester, which has been super fun, I've actually been having them come up to the document camera and share their work. It's a genetics class. And so I'm like, I'd really like to have you guys up here. And so we're doing that. And so far it's worked really well. I'll shut up. But the last thing I would say is that you have to really set the stage for these collaborative, supportive learning environments. And so putting something in your syllabus right away about this is a learning community, that's what it means, talking about respect, and also bringing up that if they're uncomfortable, they can go to you, but also that there are other people who have control over you, who have power over you. So you go to my chair, you go to my dean, whatever, if I make you feel uncomfortable, you have power elsewhere. Okay, I'll pass it.
The transparency of that is really cool. Thank you for that insight. Dominique.
So one thing that I started doing with my Think Pair Shares, instead of forcing people into groups, I allow some people to work in groups of 2, some to work in groups of 3. And if people really are uncomfortable working with anybody, I let them work by themselves. So when they have questions, I can literally just talk to that one person. So they're more free and more open to be like, I'm really confused about this, or, oh, I'm actually perfectly fine. So it's a very different dynamic than trying to force people into things that they don't want to do. But I really like the idea of putting the learning community directly into the syllabus. That was a good idea.
And that's, I mean, with the syllabus, we're talking about expectation, right? That the students can expect from you right out of the gate that these standards will be upheld. So absolutely. Cindy.
So I was also struck by this idea of anti-capitalist politics, specifically when it comes to competition within a classroom. I think one of the key things that I've noticed with a lot of students is the fact that they are always very eager to compare themselves to other students. Oh, this person is doing that and this person's score was that. So, you know, after every exam.
Especially in a pre-health context.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Every exam, they want to know what the highest score was, what's the average, where do I stand? And so I discourage that. I tend not to share certain bits of information with them. And I instead encourage them to focus on their own growth. Where were you at the beginning? Where would you like to be at the end? And how can we get you there? Let's just focus on you. That has helped a lot. I found that it's decreased a lot of the anxiety that my students have had. So instead of trying to compete with the other people in the classroom, they're really just competing with themselves. They're just trying to get better. The one question I do have, so the other thing that I do is also provide some flexibility. So some of you guys mentioned, you know, allowing an entire day for an exam instead of just, 2-hour period. That's been very useful for my students, especially students with varying abilities. They have the opportunity to take their exams wherever they choose, a place that's comfortable for them. It doesn't have to be the classroom, it can be anywhere. But if you do want the classroom, I make that available as well. Different times that assignments can be submitted, different types of assignments I found are very useful. So if you want to draw your response, that's fine. If you want to write it out, that's fine too. As long as you communicate and you feel like you're growing. I have found just in the past few months that I've been doing this, it's really supported their growth and it's helped them to open up a lot in the classroom, which is always the goal, right? If you get the students talking, then you can help them more. So my question to you guys is, how would you suggest, so there's this idea of sustainability and supporting students who learn differently. How do you suggest doing that with assessments? So that's always one of the challenges.
And can I, as you all consider that question, we have a very active chat going on. Carlos suggested some really good language for adding stuff to the syllabus, and Kelsey has shared her learning community syllabus. So please check out the wealth of information that's available there for you. And now Cindy's question about considering this through assessment.
I don't have like a perfect answer, and I don't think anyone could have one, but something I did real intentionally on the first day in the spring semester was talk about how in the course I was teaching, there's different kinds of assessments. And there's multiple kinds of assignments that will at times feel like overwhelming, that there's lots of different things going on simultaneously, and that not every assignment's really going to land with you. But there's many different types so that we can all engage with the different styles that we learn. And like explaining that out to students, I had multiple of them come up to me and said like they were way more willing to like get through an assignment they hated, knowing that like it's a good experience and someone out there's benefiting from this. I get why the instructor is having us do this, and trying to find more ways to weave that in, to tell students the whys behind our assignments. That's not always helpful when like high stakes stuff are usually like tests and lower stakes stuff feels more formative, but trying to balance those out too, or put more percent value into formative assignments that might be more completion based with lots of feedback, could be a way to even that out. Yeah.
So I'm glad, Cindy, that you had brought up, like, I'm glad I wasn't the only person struck by the anti-capitalist politics. Again, I think the idea is very interesting. Like, I think what it's driving at is trying not to get everybody to compete against each other. It's just, I'd never really seen sort of what we consider as an economics term used in this situation. And what you're really getting at is simply the idea of humanizing people. And if you look too further down there, the idea of recognizing wholeness, and that we don't want to reduce someone just to the person with the disability. So whatever can be done to get at people's entire, or just getting to know your students, right? Getting to know all the other different things they're worried about, what their ambitions are, like you were describing, like where do you want to be at the end of the semester. So I was struck by those particular goals, which is easier to do, obviously, if you have smaller classes. As always, when we have these conversations, doing this with 300 people as opposed to 30 people would be a very different road to hoe. So Carly.
Yeah, I was trying to remember. Someone brought it up, and I wanted to make sure I didn't forget it and circled back to it. Cindy, I think it was you talking about making space for students to take exams on campus when you can. I love that idea. I haven't offered that to any students, and I am going to start because I think that's excellent. Something that the author reported in the happy hour meeting where he was talking about his work was that's one of the biggest accommodations that isn't being met during COVID times because of lack of access to campus. And while we can provide spaces on campus for students, like I tried looking for some like low distraction environments off campus, and I was thinking, oh, public libraries, that'd be great. And they're not open for that in a lot of places. And so just wondering if y'all have found any like tried and true off campus spaces, or if this is really a community-wide bottleneck. I am struggling really hard with that one.
So Carly, it's me again. So our campus is fully in person. Again, we've had a sprinkling of students be remote, but it's very small compared with last year. But even so, we had adopted Respondus for exams. It's an online tool that basically monitors the students, which means they can take the exam anywhere, but they're being recorded. So, there's still some equity there in terms of there's no cheating and all of that stuff. But even though I'm using Respondus, I still give my students the option of just coming into class, because some of them do feel more comfortable just being in the classroom, sitting at a desk, taking their exam. So I give them the option of doing that. In the same token, there are some students who say, no, I'd rather sit in the university library. I'd rather stay in my dorm, and that's okay too. This means that every student, whatever their needs are, it's met. And this has been the simplest way that I found that I could do it, is to just stick with Respondus, but still give them the options of where they actually take the exam. In terms of libraries, I know, so we're in Connecticut, our COVID rates are very low. So just about everything has reopened. So I know that our public libraries are open again, but I haven't had any students go that way. I haven't had anyone take that option. They just stay on campus and either use the library here or their dorms or empty classrooms. So that's kind of what they've opted for so far.
So I moved down here to looking at some of the suggestions, or at least the environments that have to be thought about with respect to STEM education. And I bypassed again the laboratory spaces part because we are an active class or active learning based group, but I encourage you to take a look at all the suggestions in here in terms of making your spaces accessible for all. And a lot of what's talked about here with respect to active learning classrooms are in fact things that we've talked about. I mean, looky here. Assessment practices and stuff we were just talking about. The idea of required participation, I think, is an interesting one in terms of its perspective barriers for a variety of students, but then also how one could get around those particular issues. And so it mentions here autistic or socially anxious students being uncomfortable, people whose first language is not the language of instruction having barriers, and then white masculine participation norms as it describes here. And so do certain groups tend to dominate discussions, and does that not allow others to participate? And so there's a lot in play here. And so I don't know if there's a really obvious answer as to how to deal with these sort of things, short of being conscious of how you assemble groups in the first place. And as I often say, you could have an entire journal club session just on that question. And then if you choose to assemble your groups in some kind of deliberate way, how are you monitoring their progress? What are you doing? Maybe assigning tasks a la POGIL or something. What are you doing to ensure that the students in the different groups actually are being able to actively participate? And Cindy comments about depending on how we measure participation, and that's absolutely true. Does one have to be a speaker, right? Does one have to be a spokesperson to be considered a participant? Probably not. That's why I think maybe in some of these group sessions, the assigning of tasks can be a good thing. Allowing people to do stuff contributing to a group activity that they are comfortable doing. Again, that's sort of figuring out the dynamics as you go. But this just, again, it being an essay, it allows you to think about all these types of questions. So I suppose what I would ask you now is, do you guys do anything with respect to setting up your groups in this kind of deliberate way with an eye towards eliminating some of these barriers for any number of different constituencies in their classes? I myself have never gone to a huge amount of trouble on this, and sometimes I wonder if I should, that I've allowed people just to self-assemble. So anyone do anything different than that?
Yes.
Awesome. And what do you do?
So I think I'm going to argue with you about, we could spend a whole journal club session. We could spend years talking about group composition. Oh my goodness. And pretty much any rationale you want to take, there's some evidence out there that supports it.
Yep.
So having homogeneous groups, great. Having non-homogeneous groups, great. Performance diversity, absolutely. Social comfort, yeah. So I've done different things. I've done random assignment. I've done performance, trying to average team performance based on incoming metrics like previous semester GPA or ACT, something like that. I've done self-select. I've done pick a cute critter card and all the cats there, all the chihuahuas there, all the whatever, right? So there's all kinds of different things that I've used right now. And during COVID, I formed teams based on availability outside class because I wanted them to meet at least once weekly for a study session. And so they did a survey about when they'd be available outside of class, and then they met up, and based on their schedules, they formed a team. I gave them parameters for how long the team meeting should be, and I gave them a task. So every week they had to do a wrap-up assignment where they compared something from class, did an extension of a practice problem, did a reflection, right? And also for my first year class, I had them chat a little bit about just random stuff. How many stuffed animals do you sleep with? How far away did you drive to go to your whatever, right? Like just to get them forming relationships. But the important thing was that they had this stable community that they were going to, and that I told them what the rules were. So I think we're like, oh, form a team and do this thing. Students, we should never assume know how to interact at all. Everything from exchange email addresses, or, here's how to share a Google Doc, or you need to rotate who the team captain is every single week. All of those things need to be prescribed. And if you've got upper division students that have been through this a little bit and have some of these team building skills, you can work with that. The first year students who don't know how to do this, you got to lead them every step of the way. It has to be super explicit, even to the point of saying, why are we even forming teams? And if you don't have a good reason, oh, baby, buckle up.
Very good. Carly.
Yeah, Kelsey, those are really great ways to group. Having done like a lot of those myself, I never grouped intentionally until I was in my last postdoc working as a consultant on a project in a class where the instructor was thinking really intentionally about making sure that there was diversity engineered into the groups. And I was like, why are you doing this? I don't get it. And she explained some of like the evidence behind like, oh, it's good to expose students to different perspectives in their own. And I was like, okay, cool. And then more and more looked for ways like, oh, you can do it any which way, upside down and backwards. I've found that self-grouping is really motivating for students to tackle a task when they get to do that themselves. However, a lot of my feedback after the fact is they like it less. So like they liked the group work less when they self-assembled than when it's just done for them. I don't know if that means it's better or worse. That's just the feedback that seems most consistent from that method. And oh, I had another one, but now I forget. My favorite way to group people is by picking candy and the different color that's randomly picked. That's how they get grouped. I definitely also structure roles. So a lot of times with breakout rooms, if they've got like a task or a problem they're solving, at the very top, it includes like, okay, if you're a group of 4, one person's going to be the note taker. One person's going to report out to the group verbally at the very end. One person needs to keep track of time, and another person needs to keep the conversation going. If there's any lags, figure out why we're slowing down and get to a productive place again. So that has been really helpful for students just to know how to act in groups, which Kelsey, I think you put that in the chat too. Really building up what does group work look like and make that really clear so that they can really engage.
Thank you for that. Dominique.
When I was getting my PhD, every year, the incoming grad students ended up having to go to a 2-day get together to learn about all different things on campus and go through like the safety trainings and things like that. As a fellow for running that, we actually spent a good 2 to 3 hours trying to assign everyone to very specific groups. So we tried to get every group with an international student, every group with a male, every group with a female, every group with somebody from architecture, one from biology, one from chemistry. So you can actually pair them together and have them talk about their different interactions and what they have had in their past to bring different points of view. So that was one really good way that we ended up bringing. We forced people to go into specific groups, but it allowed them to talk in a different way than if you were all like white males or all Asian females. It got people talking a lot.
Thank you. So I skipped down here now to the idea of normalizing access talk. And this is a thing that I had told you that I just really didn't have any experience with. So it's interesting to see some of the ideas that are listed here. My only real exposure to this kind of access talk would be in the form of the letters that we would get or do get at the beginning of semesters when students need a particular learning accommodation, right? A student needs time and a half for an exam or something like that. Usually though, it's a very, like a student hands you a letter and you provide whatever needs to be provided. The idea of the openness of what is listed here, or the idea of making the idea of accommodations more comfortable for people to talk about, I think is what's new in this case. The idea of the access check-in here, doing the introductions like you see at the beginning of the essay, certainly not things I have thought of doing, but are intriguing ideas. Certainly you would need to, like, especially in the terms of the introductions, you would need to build up a culture for that, or sort of an expectation that one would do this, but you would have to start somewhere. Cindy.
So I haven't started to ask students about, having their needs met at the beginning of class, except for the accommodation letters that you just mentioned. But so we already ask students about sharing their preferred pronouns. So this is actually one of the things that I'm thinking of implementing after reading this paper. I would love to give them an opportunity to share what specific things they think they might need, even if they don't have an access or accommodation letter provided to them. The other thing that I do right now, the other tool that I use is quarterly surveys. This is completely separate from what the university does for student evaluations. But in those surveys, I usually ask them about things that I have implemented in the class. What do you think about the worksheets? Are they helpful? What do you think about the assignments? Are those helpful? I think it would be very easy for me to include a question about accessibility. Are your needs being met in the class? Is there anything else you would like to have in the class? I think that's a great way for them to provide this information and not feel like they've been put on the spot to, share it with the entire class. So after reading the paper, it's not something that I do right now, but it's something that I think I would like to include in future surveys of my courses.
Does anyone have a strategy that they currently use in this front? And it's interesting that we keep coming back. The paper does it, and then I sort of brought up at the beginning too. We keep doing the parallels to the using of pronouns, and I guess the parallel would be, or the announcing of pronouns. The parallel being, I guess, something that was foreign to most very recently, but it's become mainstream in terms of something one does, and so maybe there's a parallel here to be struck. Yeah, I'm not sure that's surprising, honestly. This is something that I think why this essay is interesting and important to think about, that I don't think it's something that a lot of people have considered. And there's always the question of how many of your students would be affected by this. And the answer probably is we don't know, especially when we talk about issues of mental. Did I just give a whole soliloquy muted? Oh my God. Okay. Let me start over. Now I'm rattled. I had asked if anyone had a strategy like this in their own classes that they had done, similar to what is maybe not totally mainstream, but gone more mainstream in terms of asking people for their pronouns, or asking students for their pronouns. Do people have a strategy for this that they implement?
I haven't done anything yet. A lot of the courses I teach have a lot of group work aspects. And so the first day is always like an important community building day. And there's usually a group activity where they like introduce themselves and like suggest to share your pronouns, but like adding in also like an instruction feed, like, and we can share our accessibility needs, and provide them the template of, my needs are being met if you don't have anything to share out, but that doesn't mean you don't have needs. Can be a really powerful way to just put that on students' minds. And that's something I'm going to do in the future. After reading this article, I haven't been paying enough attention to it. And that doesn't mean that I can't grow and get better. So that's something I plan to do. It's not something I've done.
Anyone else on this? Yeah, I'd like to consider Cindy's question in the chat. Do you think students would willingly share their accessibility needs? I'm skeptical of that. At least in the initial, but prior to establishing a culture of some sort for this, I have a hard time envisioning the public version of what's on the first page of this essay, that people would freely just admit they need accommodations. Yeah, and I agree with that, Kelsey. We should be okay with students who do not want to share, or maybe this is something that could be done if your class is small enough. You could actually have one-on-one conversations with people at the beginning of each class. Or Carlos, did you say this up here about adding? Oh, Carly did. I just saw CAR. Survey question during the semester, not just the beginning. Yeah, so something that could be done in written form as well. Carlos?
I'm currently working on editing my survey question for the class that just started based on this conversation and making it, trying to add some way for them, if they're willing to share and share what some of their access needs. And let's see what happens.
Yeah.
I've also, well, Carly knows, we do a lot of group work. We have an interesting setting because we have undergrads and grad students from all over the place in terms of our campus, different programs, different majors, masters, doctoral students. And for me, it has been fascinating to see the group dynamics. And like Kelsey, I've tried random number generators. I've tried no cute cards yet with cats, but I've tried several different things. We used CatMe for a while, this really structured form where you could survey students and then literally move a little lever and make groups more homogeneous or less and change mix. And I have slowly backed off and been really tried to be really transparent with, here's how I created the groups. And the goal of the group is this. And I have mixed results. Every semester there's a different one, but and I don't emphasize group roles as much as, but I do try to have students have a role where they can participate and rotate.
So as we're getting closer to the top of the hour here, I guess I've already heard a few people describe, I think, the challenge that this paper has issued to them, thinking about how they might undertake this in future syllabi, future courses, things like that. Do you guys have any sense of how you would undertake these challenges yourself? I mean, Carlos just gave us a really good example. What other things are people thinking about?
So something I do when I introduce myself to classes is share that I take a long time to read things, and that I don't share that I'm dyslexic, but I share that it takes me a long time to read things, and the difference between my disclosure and my access need are different. And so sharing that I take a long time to read things, so when I ask them to read, I actually read the things too, and then add on usually like 30 seconds. And then I tell them that, and that's the metric I'm timing stuff out with. But saying that it's okay to, take a while to read, or let me know if there's anything that you find helps you learn. And sometimes sharing out that need could be really affirming for students. Even if it's just like, hey, last night I slept for 3 hours. So my access need is going to be drinking coffee during class. That's an accessibility need, that you need caffeine to help you do your work. You can't drink coffee in a lab space. So that's an access need. And just normalizing it with just everyday stuff. Not having to have it always be centered on disclosing a disability, but just saying I have this need today. I think students, it resonates with them.
And we've had this at the beginning, and I think it comes up again here. Just that simple thing of openness, like that you are willing and able to share weakness. I mean, that's not really what it is, but like try to make it more comfortable or acceptable to disclose what would be valuable information, right, for you to know. And you sort of make it okay, if you will, when you do that. And so I think, I mean, it's a simple thing, but I think a very important thing that you suggest there. Carlos.
This paper was, I was reading it 2 hours ago or an hour ago. And it made me think about something that happened to me when I was just started here. It must have been my first or second semester. We teach this class, molecular biology class, undergrads and grad students. We really pride ourselves in teamwork. We had just redesigned the course to be more team-based or group work and worksheets and people exchanging ideas. And I was all up for active learning. And then there was this student that took the class because they were interested in the topic, not because they needed it or anything, just because they were interested in the topic.
Imagine.
Yeah, and I did really poorly, but on quizzes that were directly material from slides, but did really well on putting ideas together, writing. They are an incredible writer. And then after the semester, like it must have been a couple of weeks after the semester, we were talking because I ended up hiring Riley as a student helper. They go, well, I could never, it was tough. It was a tough class, not because of the group work, but because I couldn't see the slides. I have a visual disability, and you assigned me to a group that was the one that was like way over there doing group work, but you never asked. And they literally said you never asked about that. And that goes back to this paper, just providing the opportunity to ask. And now Riley and Riley's in grad school, we write papers together, we're best friends, but it stuck with me that I never asked what they needed. And in this case, they needed something as basic as moving to a different group.
And I'm looking at what Kelsey and Dominique have written on the chat just about students' humanity, understanding some of the, I have been guilty of this, thinking that students like, well, why aren't they paying attention? Why are they having these difficulties? And like just the amount of crap that some people have in their lives. And I say this often, like I didn't realize how vanilla and ordinary my college experience was. And then I talk to my students, I'm like, holy crap, everybody has like so many things going on, so many things to worry about. And so all of the stuff you guys are mentioning in the chat, mentioning here in person, I think are really awesome things to think about here. So pretty much brings us to the top of the hour. So I want to close us out here, but thank you guys. This has actually been a really enlightening discussion. And it's nice to know that I'm not the only one that saw this and goes, oh crap, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. But also hearing you guys like your insights and how you might address these questions. So I really appreciate your candor. Thank you. If you have paper suggestions like Carlos did for this month, go ahead and forward them my way. I'm happy to get them into our discussion line. Otherwise, I really appreciate you being here today, and we'll talk to you soon.